don't have a blind faith. That'd be like walking around with something in front of our eyes. Similarly, our faith is not afraid of asking questions because asking questions helps us to see. The other day, my 5-year-old asks me, "Daddy, why did God make Satan if God knew Satan was going to do bad things?" Whoa, that's a tough question. And that's from my 5-year-old. In this video, I'm going to explain how I responded to that question, and I'm going to provide some recommendations for parents on how to answer tough questions from our children. My name is Christopher, and this video is the 4th in a series all talking about how we can teach our children the Bible. This video specifically focuses on teaching curious children, teaching kids who ask lots of questions. So if you have curious children who ask lots of questions, keep watching. So let's start by taking a look at 1 Thessalonians 5, verses 20 and 21. 1 Thessalonians 5, 20 to 21. Do not despise prophecies, but test everything. Hold fast to what is good. This passage tells us that our faith should not be blind. We should not just accept any teaching or prophecy on face value. We should test them. The same should be said for tough questions. We shouldn't bury them. We shouldn't neglect tough questions. They help us develop a deeper understanding. I have 5 recommendations on how we should respond to our children's tough questions. And I'm going to use my 5-year-old's question as an example. So let's jump right into the recommendations. The first recommendation is to change the mindset and view questions as a good thing. I know when I get tough questions from my kids, I have to remind myself that them asking questions is actually a good thing. Kids who ask tough questions are actually living out 1 Thessalonians 5. They're testing things. For example, when my 5-year-old asked me why God created Satan, I had to look on the bright side. At least my 5-year-old knows that God created everything and God knows what Satan will do. I'm glad my 5-year-old knows those things and wants to understand even more. Recommendation 2 is to encourage questions. The first thing I try to say after getting a question from my children is something like, "Wow, that's a good question." I want my kids to feel good about asking questions. The last thing I want to say is something like, "Why would you ask me that?" No, I want my kids to feel good about asking questions. I want to encourage their curiosity and deepen their understanding. We want our children to ask questions, even tough questions. So the first thing I told my 5-year-old was, "Wow, that's a tough but a really good question." Recommendation 3 is to be honest and admit if we don't know the answer. There are some things we don't understand. There are some things we'll never understand. Romans 11:34 says, "Who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor?" Certainly there are some things that God does we're never going to understand. I'll admit that I worry about how I'm going to look in the eyes of my children if I don't know the answer. But in the long run, they're really better off having an honest father than one who in the short term seems to know the answers. So the second thing I told my 5-year-old was, "I have a few thoughts, but I don't know the answer for sure." Recommendation 4 is to focus on what we do know. With tough questions, I like to start with what I know with certainty because it helps me frame the question. It helps ensure that I don't come to an incorrect conclusion. It's a little bit like multiple choice questions. Many times it's very helpful to get rid of the wrong answers. And with tough questions, it's really helpful at least to be able to say what the answer is not. So in the case of my 5-year-old, we know that God is omnipotent and knew Satan would do bad things. We also know that even the bad things that Satan does are part of God's plan. Ephesians 1 verse 11 says, "He works all things according to the counsel of his will." So I told my 5-year-old that God knew Satan would do bad things and that somehow even these bad things were part of God's plan. We also see in John 17 verse 1, when Jesus is facing his death and crucifixion, he says, "Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, that the Son may glorify you." So Satan's biggest deed, getting Jesus crucified, actually brought God and Jesus the Son more glory. And so what I told my daughter is that while we don't know for sure, perhaps God created Satan so that Satan's bad deeds would reveal more of God's glory. Recommendation 5 is to teach our kids that God knows all things. Ultimately, I want my children to look to God for the answers. God is the only one who has all the answers anyway. So with tough questions, I like to say to my kids, we should ask God that. And I think there are two different approaches to this. First, we can pray that God reveal the answers through his Bible. And secondly, we can recognize that even if God doesn't reveal the answers in his Bible, we can ask God for answers to tough questions when we get to heaven. So the last thing I said to my daughter is we should ask God that question when we see him in heaven. So as you can see, my answer to my 5-year-old's question was not all that satisfying, but it did seem to be enough for her. She's used to having a dad who doesn't have all the answers, but I hope she keeps asking hard questions. My name is Christopher, and I hope these recommendations have been helpful in how to respond to curious children who ask tough questions. Let me know what you think in the comments below.